I'm Jono Buchanan, and in this video what we're going to do is to explore gated kick triggers. The idea that we can take one sound and trigger it from another in order to create a bigger, rounder kick drum. And we're going to do that in the context of this track. So before we go any further, let's just have a listen. Okay, a punchy little 8 bars. Now, the two sounds that I want to focus on are this programmed beat loop and this bass line. Now, the bass line at the moment is kind of the problem within this track. It's producing this very sustained, low frequency content, and actually it's sucking quite a lot of life out of the track because it's sort of unyielding. It's just filling in all of the holes. What I actually want to do is to have this bass line trigger from the kick drum in order to become a sort of tuned bottom end to that sound. Now, the drums that I've programmed for this track are being taken from Drum Machine Designer. I'm using a preset called Trapdoor, and the moment I load that from the library, what I get is your classic Drum Machine Designer setup, which means that I can program a part. You can see that if I double click, then I get to see the part that I've programmed, and here it is in all of its kind of MIDI glory. But because it's Drum Machine Designer, if I come back out of here for a moment and we open up the track stack, what we have a chance to see is that all of the instruments within this kit are listed as separate tracks. And that's going to be important. And the reason it's important is because what I want to do is to select one of those tracks as the trigger for my bass line. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to come down to the bass line and I'm going to put the noise gate on this sound. That's in the Dynamics folder. If I come to Dynamics, I can come to Noise Gate. Now, what noise gates do by default is that they open and close depending on how loud the signal is that's running through them. So they're really useful if you've got a signal which has got loud bits and quiet bits and you want to get rid of the quiet bits. You can set a threshold point and the sound has to exceed the volume of that threshold in order for the gate to open and for us to hear the sound behind it. But what we can also do with gates is we can ask other sounds to trigger those gates so that they open in sync, in sort of time with one another. And that's what we're going to do here. So what I want to do is to come to the sidechain option up in the top right hand corner, and I'm going to click here to select the input source I want to act as a trigger for the bass line. Now, when I come into here, what I have a chance to do is to come and find an instrument. And what I can do is to select one of the instruments within Drum Machine Designer's instrument list. You can see that when I hover over the instrument groups, I've got the option to select just one sound, not the entire beat loop, but just one instrument from it. And I'm going to select kick 1. So what that's going to do is to use the kick as a trigger for this sound. So in theory now, every time the kick plays, the gate will open, and when it's not playing, the gate will close. Let's see if that's happening. Okay, so to hear this even more clearly, what we're going to do is to turn the solo off the entire Trapdoor kit. We're going to open this up and we're going to solo just the kick drum that we've selected as a trigger. So that's working really nicely. And the reason why we get those two kicks on the end without any bass line is because the bass note stops before those last two happen. So the reason that that's working so nicely is because the threshold point is set appropriately. I could actually make this probably a little bit louder, but you can hear that the threshold point is already working. The kick drum is loud enough to open the gate and then it closes afterwards. But there are a couple of other things that I can contour here in order to really make sure that I'm feeling like I've got the bass sound that I want. In particular, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the attack time even quicker. That means that the moment the bass, the kick drum happens, the bass is going to open and trigger very quickly. Admittedly, it was happening pretty fast anyway, but I'm going to make that as immediate as it can possibly be. And much more importantly, I'm going to slightly increase the release time. Now, what that means is that when the gate closes, rather than the note just absolutely stopping straight away, it's going to have this slight, well, we'd call it a decay phase if we were talking about synthesis, a sort of release time, which is just going to allow that sound to fade out rather than stopping so abruptly. Let's just manipulate that as we listen back. So that part is working well, but we've suddenly got these clicks. Why is that happening? Well, the attack time is actually too quick. So whilst I want this really punchy effect, actually it turns out that we're going to get the sound that we want from just a slightly less aggressive attack. That feels about right. Let's put it back in with the track. I'm just going to turn solo off and have a listen to the whole piece now. So that's a really nice effect. What we've effectively done without having to reprogram the MIDI is that we've asked a gate to sort of join together the kick drum and the bass line underneath it. And the advantage of this is it means we get all this extra bottom end. And of course, because the bass line is following the harmony of the track, the notes that are sort of tracking the chord moves, what we get is this really interesting relationship where the sort of bottom end of the kick drum is constantly adapting itself to be in tune with the rest of the track. And it's a really nice way of just making sure that the kind of groove elements of your piece, the kick, the drums and the bass, are locked together really nicely, making this kind of really tight rhythm section, if you like.